Today I want to talk about something that many of us struggle with: waiting. In a world where everything is instant messages, instant meals, instant answers, we often forget that some of the best things in life require patience. And when we don't see immediate results, we begin to wonder, is God listening? Does He care? Why isn't He answering my prayers? The Bible reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. That means that even when we don't understand what's happening, even when things seem delayed, God is at work. He sees the bigger picture. He knows what we need when we need it and how it will fit into His perfect plan. God sees the bigger picture, even when we cannot. As human beings, we are limited in our understanding, often focusing only on what is right in front of us. We become impatient when things do not happen according to our expectations, wondering if God has forgotten us or if He's even listening. However, the truth is that God's perspective is far greater than ours. He sees the past, present, and future all at once, and He understands how every event in our lives fits together like a perfect puzzle. What may seem like a delay or even a disappointment to us could actually be God aligning circumstances for something far better than we ever imagined. Consider a situation where someone prays for a job opportunity but does not receive an offer immediately. That person may feel discouraged, thinking they have been overlooked or rejected. However, what they do not see is that God is closing the wrong doors to lead them to the right one. Perhaps a better opportunity is on the way, one that will provide not just financial stability, but also personal growth, fulfillment, and a deeper sense of purpose. If the individual had received the first job they applied for, they might have missed out on the greater blessing that God had in store. This principle is beautifully expressed in Ecclesiastes 3:11, which says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This verse is a reminder that God does not work according to our schedule, but rather He orchestrates events so that when the right moment comes, everything falls into place in the most beautiful way possible. Sometimes we may struggle to see the beauty in waiting, especially when we are facing difficulties. But just as a masterpiece takes time to create, so does God's perfect plan for our lives. A powerful example of this truth is found in the life of Joseph in the Bible. As a young man, Joseph had dreams that foretold his future greatness, but instead of rising to a position of power immediately, he faced betrayal by his own brothers, was sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. From a human perspective, it seemed as though Joseph's life was filled with injustice and suffering. He could have easily questioned why God allowed such hardships. However, what he did not realize at the time was that each of those trials was preparing him for a much greater purpose. Years later, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, where he was able to save countless lives during a time of famine. Looking back, he understood that everything he went through had a purpose. If Joseph had never been sold into slavery, he would never have ended up in Egypt. If he had never been imprisoned, he would never have met the right people who would later recommend him to Pharaoh. Every event that seemed like a setback was actually a setup for something greater. When Joseph finally reunited with his brothers, he told them in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Just like Joseph, we often do not understand why we face delays, disappointments, or struggles, but if we trust in God's timing, we will eventually see that He was working everything out for our good. It is easy to grow frustrated when things do not go according to our plans, but we must remember that God's plans are far greater than ours. He is never early, never late. He is always on time. Instead of allowing impatience to take over, we should trust that God is in control and that He sees what we cannot. His timing is perfect. And when we surrender to His plan, we will experience the fullness of His blessings in ways beyond our imagination. No matter what you are waiting for today, know that God is working behind the scenes. And in due time, everything will come together in the most beautiful and perfect way. Delays are not denials. Often, when we pray for something and do not receive an immediate answer, we assume that God has said no, or that He is not listening. However, just because something has not happened yet does not mean that it never will. God's silence is not his absence. Sometimes what seems like a delay is actually God's way of preparing us for what is to come. He knows when we are truly ready to receive his blessings, and he ensures that everything happens at the right time. What we perceive as a delay may actually be divine protection, preparation, or a test of faith. There are many times in life when we feel frustrated because things are not happening according to our timeline. We may be waiting for a breakthrough in our careers, relationships, or personal goals, but the doors seem to remain closed. In these moments, we must remind ourselves that God does not withhold good things from his children. Instead, he withholds them until the right moment. Just as a loving parent does not give a child a gift they are not yet mature enough to handle, God does not grant us things before we are spiritually, emotionally, or mentally prepared to receive them. The waiting period is not a punishment, it is a season of growth. Abraham and Sarah in the Bible experienced what seemed like a delay. God had promised them a child, yet years passed and Sarah remained barren. They became impatient and took matters into their own hands, leading to unnecessary complications. But when the time was right, according to God's perfect plan, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. If they had fully trusted God's timing instead of trying to force the promise to come true on their own terms, they would have avoided much heartache. This story teaches us an important lesson. When we try to rush ahead of God, we often make things more difficult for ourselves. But when we trust him, he fulfills his promises in ways that exceed our expectations. Waiting strengthens faith. It is during the waiting period that we learn to trust God more deeply. If everything happened instantly, there would be no need for faith, patience, or reliance on God's wisdom. It is easy to trust him when everything is going smoothly, but real faith is demonstrated when we continue believing even when nothing seems to be happening. The process of waiting refines us, teaching us to depend on God rather than our own understanding. Think about a seed planted in the ground. When a farmer sows a seed, he does not expect to see a full-grown tree the next day. Instead, he waters it, nurtures it, and patiently waits for it to grow. He trusts the process, knowing that beneath the soil, roots are forming even though he cannot see them. Similarly, when we wait on God, we must trust that he is working behind the scenes, even if we do not see immediate results. The Bible assures us in Isaiah 40:31, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." This verse reminds us that waiting on God is not wasted time. It is a time of renewal where we gain spiritual strength and endurance. Those who learn to wait with faith and patience will experience God's blessings at the right time and in the right way. We must remember that when God makes us wait, he is preparing something far greater than we can imagine. He is aligning people, circumstances, and opportunities so that when he finally says, "Now is the time," everything will fall into place perfectly. While we wait, we should not lose hope or grow weary. Instead, we should embrace the process, knowing that God's plan is always for our good. His timing is perfect, and in the end, we will realize that every moment of waiting was worth it. God's timing is different from ours. As human beings, we live in a world where everything is fast-paced, and we expect immediate results. We want instant answers, quick solutions, and immediate breakthroughs. But God does not operate on our schedule. His ways are higher than ours, and his understanding is beyond our comprehension. We may feel like things are taking too long, but God is never late. He works according to his divine plan, ensuring that everything happens at the perfect moment. When we compare our timeline with God's, we may feel frustrated, but we must remember that he sees the end from the beginning. He knows what is best for us and will never allow anything to happen too soon or too late. In our impatience, we often question why God allows certain delays. We pray, we hope, and we wait, yet nothing seems to change. But what we fail to see is that God is working behind the scenes, arranging things in ways we cannot understand. A delay does not mean that God has forgotten us. It means that he is preparing us, strengthening our faith, and aligning the right circumstances so that when the time comes, everything will be as it should be. The Bible reminds us in 2 Peter 3:8, With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. This verse emphasizes that God's perception of time is different from ours. What feels like a long wait to us is just a moment in God's grand design. Many times, we want things to happen immediately, but if we receive something before we are ready, it may not be a blessing, it may be a burden. Imagine giving a young child the keys to a car before they are old enough to drive. Instead of being a gift, it would be dangerous. Similarly, God sometimes withholds certain things from us because He knows that we are not yet ready to handle them. He does not want us to ruin the blessings He has prepared for us. He waits until we have grown, matured, and are spiritually strong enough to receive them. One of the greatest examples of God's timing being different from ours is found in the life of Jesus. The people of Israel were waiting for a Messiah for centuries, expecting Him to come in a certain way and at a specific time. But God had a plan that was beyond human understanding. Jesus did not arrive according to their expectations. He came at the perfect time, according to God's divine will. Galatians 4:04 says, "But when the set time had fully come, God sent His Son." This reminds us that God is never in a hurry, yet He is never late. Everything happens exactly when it is supposed to. God works behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. Often we think that because we do not see immediate results, nothing is happening. But just like a seed planted in the ground takes time to sprout, God's plans take time to unfold. Just because we do not see movement does not mean that He is not working. He is arranging things, aligning people, and opening the right doors at the right time. If we rush ahead of Him, we may miss out on the best that He has prepared for us. In times of waiting, our faith is tested. We may feel like giving up, but those who trust in God's timing will never be disappointed. The waiting period is not wasted time. It is preparation. God is strengthening us, refining us, and teaching us to trust Him fully. If we learn to wait on Him with faith and patience, we will see that His timing is always perfect. The moment He answers our prayers, we will understand why He made us wait, and we will realize that His plan was far greater than anything we could have imagined. God works behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. Many times in life, we feel as though nothing is happening. We pray, we wait, and we hope, yet there is no visible change in our situation. This can be frustrating and discouraging, but just because we do not see movement does not mean God is not working. He is always at work, orchestrating things in ways we may not understand. His plans are unfolding in the background, and at the right moment, everything will come together in a way that is beyond our imagination. A seed planted in the soil does not immediately sprout into a tree. It takes time for the roots to grow beneath the surface before any visible change appears above the ground. If a farmer gives up too soon and stops watering the seed just because he does not see growth, he will miss out on the harvest. The same principle applies to our lives. God is nurturing and preparing us even when we cannot see it. We may think that our prayers are unanswered, but in reality, God is working in hidden ways to bring about the best outcome. One of the most powerful examples of God working behind the scenes is found in the story of Esther. She was an ordinary Jewish girl who became the queen of Persia, yet she did not immediately see the purpose behind her position. However, when her people were threatened with destruction, she realized that God had placed her there for a reason. Esther 4:14 says, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" Esther may not have seen God's hand at work while she was being taken to the palace, but in hindsight, it was clear that He had been preparing her for a greater purpose. In the same way, we may not understand why we go through certain experiences, but when the time comes, we will see that God was guiding us all along. Impatience can lead to mistakes. When we grow tired of waiting, we may try to force things to happen on our own. This can lead to unnecessary struggles and pain. There are many examples in the Bible where people acted out of impatience and suffered because of it. Abraham and Sarah, for instance, were promised a child, but when years passed with no sign of fulfillment, they took matters into their own hands. Sarah gave her servant Hagar to Abraham, hoping that this would bring about the child they longed for. But this decision led to tension, pain, and division in their family. If they had waited on God's perfect timing, they would have avoided many difficulties. Yet despite their impatience, God was still faithful to his promise, and Isaac was born at the appointed time. We often think we know what is best for our lives, but our understanding is limited. Rushing into things before God's time can lead to disappointment, frustration, and missed opportunities. When we wait on him, we receive what is truly meant for us in the way that he intended. Sometimes what we want is not actually what we need, and in his wisdom, God withholds certain things for our protection. Other times, he is simply refining us, strengthening our character, and teaching us to trust him completely before blessing us with something greater than we ever expected. God's timing brings the best results. When we look back on our lives, we will realize that every delay had a purpose. The times when we thought nothing was happening were actually seasons of preparation. The moments when we felt forgotten were times when God was working behind the scenes, putting everything into place. If we trust his timing, we will receive his blessings in their fullest form without regret or sorrow. He knows what is best for us, and when the right time comes, everything will fall into place perfectly. Impatience can lead to mistakes. As human beings, we often want things to happen quickly and according to our own plans. When we pray for something, we expect an immediate answer, and when things do not happen as fast as we would like, we may feel discouraged. However, one of the greatest dangers of impatience is that it can lead us to make decisions outside of God's will. When we try to rush ahead of him instead of waiting for his perfect timing, we often create unnecessary struggles, pain, and regret. Acting out of impatience can cause us to settle for less than what God has planned for us, or push us into situations that we are not ready for. A clear example of the dangers of impatience can be seen in the story of Saul, the first king of Israel. In 1 Samuel 13, Saul and his army were preparing for battle against the Philistines, but the prophet Samuel had not yet arrived to offer sacrifices to God. The people began to grow restless, and instead of waiting for Samuel as instructed, Saul took matters into his own hands and offered the sacrifice himself. This act of disobedience cost him dearly. When Samuel finally arrived, he told Saul that because of his impatience and failure to trust God's timing, his kingdom would not last. What Saul thought was a small act of taking control ended up costing him his legacy. This story serves as a powerful reminder that when we act out of impatience, instead of trusting God, we risk losing the blessings that he has in store for us. Many of us have experienced times when we rushed into decisions that we later regretted. Whether it was taking a job that was not right for us, entering into a relationship before we were ready, or making financial decisions out of fear rather than faith, impatience often leads to disappointment. God does not want us to settle for less than is best. If we learn to trust his timing, we will find that what he has planned for us is far better than anything we could have forced on our own. One of the reasons impatience is so dangerous is that it often blinds us to God's wisdom. When we are in a hurry, we do not take the time to seek his guidance, pray for discernment, or wait for confirmation. Instead, we rely on our own understanding, which is limited and flawed. Proverbs 3:05-06 reminds us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. When we rush ahead, we may think we are taking control of our lives, but in reality, we are stepping away from God's perfect plan. True wisdom comes from trusting that he knows what is best for us, even when we do not understand his timing. Another danger of impatience is that it can lead to anxiety and frustration. When we constantly worry about the future, we rob ourselves of the peace that comes from trusting God. Instead of enjoying the present moment and allowing God to work, we become consumed with trying to force things to happen on our schedule. This kind of stress is unnecessary because God has already promised to take care of us. Philippians 4:6-7 tells us, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. When we surrender our timelines to God and trust in his process, we experience his peace, knowing that he is in control. The best way to avoid the mistakes that come from impatience is to cultivate a heart of trust and surrender. Instead of trying to make things happen on our own, we should pray for wisdom, seek God's direction, and wait for His leading. When we learn to trust Him completely, we will see that His plans are always better than ours. He knows when we are ready, He knows what we need, and He knows how to bring it into our lives in the most perfect way. If we learn to wait patiently, we will not only avoid unnecessary mistakes, but also experience the joy and fulfillment that come from receiving God's blessings in His perfect timing. Waiting on God requires faith and patience. In a world where everything moves so fast, waiting can feel frustrating and even discouraging. We live in a time where instant results are expected, whether it is quick responses, fast solutions, or immediate answers. But God does not operate according to human schedules. His ways are higher than ours, and His understanding is beyond our comprehension. Waiting is not a punishment. It is a process that strengthens our faith and builds our character. It teaches us to trust in God's perfect plan rather than our own limited understanding. When we are forced to wait, it is easy to become anxious, frustrated, or even doubtful. We may wonder if God has forgotten us or if He is ignoring our prayers. However, the Bible is filled with stories of people who had to wait on God's timing before receiving His promises. Abraham waited many years for the son God had promised him. Joseph endured slavery and imprisonment before stepping into his destiny. David was anointed as king but had to wait for years before he actually took the throne. In each of these situations, the waiting period was not wasted time, it was preparation. Abraham's faith was strengthened, Joseph's character was refined, and David developed the wisdom and leadership skills needed to rule. If any of them had rushed ahead or given up during the waiting, they would not have been ready to receive what God had planned for them. Faith is not just about believing when things are easy. It is about trusting even when nothing seems to be happening. When we are waiting for a breakthrough, it is natural to feel discouraged, especially when we do not see immediate results. But God does not work according to human logic. He may not answer in the way we expect, but He is always working behind the scenes. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 40:31 that those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. This verse reminds us that waiting on God does not weaken us, it strengthens us. It deepens our faith, teaches us endurance, and draws us closer to Him. One of the most challenging aspects of waiting is trusting that God's timing is better than ours. We often have our own plans and expectations, and when things do not happen as quickly as we would like, we may feel tempted to take matters into our own hands. But when we truly trust in God, we can surrender our timelines to Him, knowing that He will bring the right things into our lives at the right moment. Rushing ahead of Him can lead to mistakes, disappointments, and unnecessary struggles. When we wait on God, we receive His blessings in their fullest and most perfect form. Patience is an important part of faith because it shows that we truly believe God is in control. If we only trust Him when things happen quickly, our faith is weak. True faith means believing that God is at work even when there is no visible sign of progress. The waiting season is a test of our trust in Him. Will we continue to believe even when things seem silent? Will we remain faithful even when there are delays? These are the moments that define our relationship with God. The good news is that God never makes His children wait without a purpose. He is not delaying to frustrate us or to hold back good things from us. He is preparing us for something greater than we can imagine. When the right time comes, everything will fall into place in ways that are beyond our understanding. What seemed like a long delay will suddenly make perfect sense. The key is to remain faithful, patient, and expectant, knowing that God's timing is always perfect. And when He finally moves, it will be worth every moment of waiting. God's timing always leads to the best outcome. As human beings, we often believe that we know what is best for our lives. We make plans, set goals, and establish timelines for when we think things should happen. However, life does not always unfold the way we expect. Sometimes doors remain closed, opportunities seem delayed, and prayers go unanswered for long periods. In these moments, it is easy to feel disappointed, frustrated, or even doubtful about God's plan. But when we look back at past experiences, we often realize that things worked out in ways far greater than what we had initially planned. This is because God sees what we cannot. He knows what is ahead, and He ensures that everything happens at the right time for our ultimate good. One of the reasons God's timing is perfect is that He knows what we need better than we do. There are times when we think we are ready for a particular blessing, but God sees otherwise. He knows when our hearts, minds, and circumstances are fully prepared to handle what He has in store for us. If we receive something too soon, we may not appreciate it, or worse, we may mishandle it. For example, a person may desire a leadership role, but if they lack the wisdom, patience, or experience needed, they might struggle and fail. God, in His wisdom, delays certain things not to punish us, but to prepare us. He refines our character, strengthens our faith, and equips us with the necessary tools to handle His blessings properly. Another reason God's timing leads to the best outcome is that He aligns everything perfectly. Often when we want something, we think only about ourselves. However, God is working on a much larger scale. He is not only preparing us, but also orchestrating circumstances and aligning the right people, places, and opportunities to ensure that everything falls into place perfectly. What may seem like a delay to us is actually God setting things up for the best possible result. When we rush ahead of God, we risk stepping into something that is not yet fully prepared. And as a result, we may face unnecessary struggles. But when we wait on His timing, everything unfolds smoothly because He has arranged every detail in a way that we could never have done on our own. Trusting God's timing requires us to let go of control. This can be difficult because we naturally want to direct our own lives. We want answers now, solutions immediately, and results without delay. However, faith means surrendering our timelines to God, knowing that He knows best. Proverbs 16:9 says, "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." This verse reminds us that while we may have our own plans, it is ultimately God who determines the right path for us. When we try to force things to happen on our schedule, we often end up stressed, frustrated, and exhausted. But when we trust in God's perfect timing, we experience peace, knowing that He is in control and that everything will come together at the right moment. Waiting on God's timing is not easy, but it is always worth it. Looking back, we will see that the things we once thought were delays were actually divine appointments. The moments when we felt forgotten were the times when God was working behind the scenes, setting things in motion for our benefit. Every prayer that seemed unanswered was actually being answered in a better way than we could have imagined. Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." God's plan is always greater than anything we could dream of. When we choose to trust God's timing, we step into a place of peace, faith, and expectation. Instead of worrying about when things will happen, we rest in the assurance that God is working everything out for our good. And when the right time comes, His blessings will be far greater than what we could have arranged for ourselves. His timing is not just good, it is always perfect. In every season of life, trusting in God's timing is essential. God is always working behind the scenes, preparing us, aligning circumstances, and ensuring that everything happens at the right moment. When we try to rush ahead, we risk making mistakes, missing out on His best, and settling for less than what He has planned. But when we surrender our plans and trust His perfect timing, we receive blessings that are greater than anything we could have imagined. Looking back, we will realize that every delay had a purpose. Every unanswered prayer was answered in a better way, and every waiting period was a season of preparation. God's ways are higher than ours, and His timing is always perfect. If we remain patient, faithful, and trusting, we will see His plan unfold beautifully in our lives, just as He intended.